Okay, how's everybody doing this evening? Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to start right off. Put your thinking caps on. All right, ready? Where's Flatiron Point? Down in Joppa. Right. Water Street and Union Street meet. There's a debate. The clam shack used to be on the left, right at the end of water. And then the debate is where it's shaped like an iron. So is it Goodwin Avenue or is it back up to Marlborough Street where that iron is shaped? But that is Flatiron Point. Grasshopper Plains. Story Avenue area. Story Avenue. Yes, Grasshopper Plains. Sawyer Hill. Marquand area, yeah, by Maudsley State Park, the old Gypsy Lane, Hoyt's Lane, there's Sawyer Hill Burying Ground, which is kind of hidden up a few hundred yards from Maudsley State parking lot. Where were the two train passenger depots located prior to the 1950s? CVS, yes, beautiful train depot building. And the second? Washington Street, correct. Who was George Corliss, and what building did his estate fund to construct?
Corliss Nursery.
I'm sorry?
Corliss Nursery.
Corliss Nursery? No. Is there a relationship? Yes.
Home for Aged Men.
Home for Aged? No, that was Epilaf Griffin, Mr. Griffin. YMCA, yes, the beautiful building that was on the corner of Harris and State, where the addition for the library is now. Beautiful building, burned in the late 80s. Where is Down Along? No, Down Along is State Street down to Marches Hill, High Street. That's Down Along. Up along? The other way, right. State up to 3 roads. Name the 2 churches where the Angel Gabriel weather vane was located. This is a toughie. Yes, sir. Purchase Street. Yes, that's the second location. The People's Methodist on Purchase Street. Where was the first location? This is a tough one. The Universalist Church on the corner of Middle and Fair. Middle and Fair, where that condo apartment building is, that's where the Universal Church is. Yes, sir?
So there's a tale that helicopters tried to steal that off the roof of the Methodist Church back in the 60s.
I don't know, but there is a truth to helicopters or people climbing up the steeple and stealing weather vanes, and that happened on the Old South Church. Yes, yes, and it was stolen and never recovered off the Old South. What was the name of the hill where soldiers kept watch over the coastline for British ships? Marches Hill, yeah, Lunds Hill, Marches Hill. Yep, okay, well, pretty good, all right. Got some trivia for the next garden party. Okay, are we ready? Welcome, okay, so Newburyport Clipper Heritage Trail Volume 1 was published back in 2020. The original thought was to have 1 book. And I remember getting into 2018 or 19, and I thought, wait a minute, this book is going to be 600 pages. So I split it into 2. Right? Okay, there we go. There's a beautiful photo. Where are we standing looking at? Where was this photo taken? Unitarian on Pleasant Street. Yep, looking down towards Inn Street. Right, there's Inn Street here. Right? There's the Custom House right here. Okay, getting right? Market Square. All right, know where you are? Okay, so here's Volume 1. Busy time, busy place in Market Square. Here. And then looking up State Street. Okay, I'm very proud, Volume 1 won a couple honorable mentions in the New England Book Festival, and then Reader's Views gave it a 5-star review. A woman, Jill, gave a nice review, and she used to, with her father, go as a child visiting historic places and cemeteries. But what I liked about this review is people might read it and say, I don't care about history. That's okay. But they'll read about it and think, wait a minute, she's recommending, oh, come on and go visit Newburyport. Okay? So yes, she loved the book, but also, hey, go visit Newburyport. I want to go a Gold Award in the Classics Nonfiction category. Okay, so Volume 2, again, self-guided tours. 9 tours, maps and legends, about 90 locations, people that I've written about, and pushing 400 images. And Volume 1 focused more on the downtown. Volume 2 is focused from Plum Island all the way up to Maudsley State Park. Okay, that's the working cover. That's the Symington. It was a schooner getting ready for launching. Okay, and how I help to tell the stories, I'm very visually oriented, and so we have the maps, different kinds of maps are used, and then artists rendering. This is Laura Coombs Hills here, of a young Ethel Reed, who is an artist and who drew posters, and she grew up on Kent Street. On the right, you can see St. Paul, so we have images. Scott Nason, I think many of you know his name, local historian and collector. Several years ago, he told me, because over through his years, he visited so many antique shows and collections and conferences and so forth. And he said that Newburyport, the Newburys, Newburyport, West Newbury, we have a better collection of images, old images of our community than Boston has of her community. I mean, we have thousands of images housed with Custom House, Museum of Old Newbury, the Library Archives, and private collections. So that is huge. And we do have an excellent collection of history books I think we take it for granted, but we have one of the best collections of history documents, texts, so forth, and images than any other community, and very proud of that. Gravestones, there are 3 tours in this book of 7 or 8 people. Images, I did this for the shipbuilding tour to see exactly how many different types of ships, vessels that we made, and so that black and white image you can able to see. And then, of course, the ads in the city directories, all-time favorite. Love the city directories. Okay, so tour 1 is along the water's edge. So, for example, I've written about, here's the different places and people I've written about. The Great Fire of 1934, Albert Russell, his iron foundry, Caldwell's distillery, Merrimack Arms and Manufacturing, Toll Manufacturing, Bailey Hat Factory, Harriet Prescott Spofford, our wonderful poet, Chain Bridge, and the Essex Merrimack Bridge. And this is an example. Every single tour, as Volume 1, has a map and has a legend. Okay, where are we in this image? There's Bossy Gillis gas station. He had many in town. This is Bridge Street, and this is Merrimack Street. The kayak place is now located here. This is the Great Fire of 1934. And this was the old Dodge shoe building here that burned down. Oh, I love this photo. What are we looking at? This is kind of tough. So we are standing Rings Island. Looking on Rings Island, looking over, and this area right today, for many, many years, since the 20s, is now known as Cashman Park. This is where originally it was Michael Cashman. He tried to get this going to create a park here. He finally was elected in 1922, and he says in his inaugural address, we are going to make this a park. So they cleaned up the area. It was known as Central Park, a place where hundreds of people would go and watch baseball games. Baseball was huge. And then in the 40s, before he passed away, he finally agreed, it was renamed Cashman Park. So thank you, Michael Cashman. You know this building? The Toll building, yeah. Started out as a Ballard rifle. They were making rifles there. Then eventually the Toll family, a group of businessmen, started a business here, the Toll manufacturing. It's a very cool photograph. Yeah, okay. Deer Island. Who lived on Deer Island? Our famous poet, Harriet Prescott Spofford. There's the chain bridge, 1790s built. Then this is Essex Merrimack, and at one time part of it was a covered bridge. And we're standing where? Where do you think?
On I-95.
Sort of. The Maudsley State, Moulton Castle area. And you can still walk back there through Maudsley State Park and see where the castle was located. Okay, tour 2. I separated this tour and I wanted a separate tour. The Manson Shipyard. You can still see Manson Drive, and it goes to, down on Merrimack Street, the North End Boat Club. Yes. John Currier Jr. Shipyard, Moorbridge and Merrill, Jackman, Curry and Townsend, and the great clipper shipbuilder, Donald McKay. Whoops. Just love these images of these ships, just incredible. Most of the shipyards would be building 2 vessels at a time. One larger one, they do all the framing and then the planking, and then those leftover, smaller, shorter boards would go to the smaller vessel. Oh, here's a group, a typical group, a gang, the shipyard gang. There were plankers, there were framers, there were all the caulkers, there was the blacksmiths, and so forth. Beautiful image here. This is great. This is the Symington here. This is close to Chashaman, up on Merrimack Street, which is now Merson. Is it still Merson? Yeah. Change, right. Okay. And back here is Carr's Island. Carr's Island. And when the ships were launched, they had to be very careful. The tides had to be perfect. The angle of the vessel had to be perfect going into the water. If it was angled too steep, it would go in and get caught in the mud. If it was too flat of an angle, it would skiff and skim right over the surface of the water and hit Carr's Island. So there was some, definitely some engineering feats when it was time to launch. And you can see there's the second vessel here. Yeah.
Is that as far up the river as they moved in building ships?
No, they were a little bit further, and then certainly up Salisbury Point, which is now Amesbury, around the Essex Merrimack. They were up there too. And this is the John Currier vessel being towed out. When the vessel, the very large vessels, they did not have cargo yet. And so they were towed out. And often they were towed all the way to Salem or Boston because they did not have the ballast. If they set the sail, once they get out of the mouth of the river, they could have been blown across the Atlantic Ocean because they didn't have the ballast. Okay, tour 3 is around the Frog Pond. Edit, this is in the process of editing. Bartlett, Mass, Superior Courthouse, the Washington Statue, schoolhouses, the Putnam Free School, the old jail, Guinea Village, write about African Americans. I know Cabria was here a few weeks ago talking about the black population, Old Hill Burying Ground, and Highland Cemetery. Beautiful photographs here. See this here?
This is a schoolhouse.
Schoolhouse here. There was one schoolhouse here on the east end of Bartlett Mall. There was also one over here. And what is this right here? St. Paul's, correct. Okay, where are we? We've got our back to the courthouse, and we're looking down Green Street. This is the old Putnam Free School. It was a school on its own. There was the women's high school. There was Brown High School over on Brown Street at the entrance of Oak Hill, that big yellow house as you enter. That was high school and once Newburytown Hall. And the girls' high school, Brown High School, and Putnam joined together and renamed it Newburyport High School. This building burned down in the 40s, and it took down the IC steeple. And so that's why you see how tall the steeple is. That burned down in the 40s. But they were able to save the church, obviously.
So that street right there is Green Street?
Yes, you're looking down Green Street. This house is still here. Yeah. There's the church. So they rebuilt, and the Catholic Church did a nice job of rebuilding that, to replace the high school. Okay, one of the oldest photographs in the United States, taken by renowned Dr. Henry Coy Perkins, who was a doctor, had a business, a medical office on Essex Street. He was technically the second photographer, after 2 or 3 months, the first photographer, but he was the first photographer to take aerial photographs. This is looking across Bartlett Mall at the old jail on Auburn Street. Oh, yes, yes. And restored quite a bit by Chuck Griffin and his wife. Okay, this is a very neat map. Here's the old burying ground. Here's the Mall, High Street. This path was, now Greenleaf, was known as Chickering Road. This is the powder house. This is where the first powder house was, on the corner here. And then Auburn Street. Now, Christian at the Museum of Old Newbury sent this map to me. She says, oh, we just found this map, early 1800s. And I said, oh my goodness. When you go down Auburn Street, you know, you're looking into the old burying ground. On the left is the giant field. There's no gravestones there. So for years I always thought, oh, maybe there's African Americans buried there, poor people who couldn't. But then it didn't make sense, because all my experience with fixing gravestones, you usually can find a piece of a gravestone, okay? Well, the mystery has finally been solved. And back up, the GPR, a gentleman, Bob, we're going to, Museum of Old Newbury, we're going to do a little project of ground penetrating radar in certain areas to find grave sites. So Bob, I met Bob a few months ago, and I said, could you take a quick run with your, kind of like a lawnmower, if you've ever seen pictures of it. So he went up and down this area twice, and he says, I can't find anything except ledge. And I was very disappointed. I thought, oh, okay, there's nobody buried here. Well, look what it says. Right there. It says pond. Pond. There was water there. And that's in 1800, about this map is about this time. They moved across the street to New Hill Burying Ground on the corner of Pond and Hill Street, and they eventually renamed it Highland Cemetery. Well, people couldn't be buried here because it was a wet area. There you go. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, so we think we call it now, everybody else calls it mall.
English pronunciation. Remember the English settled here. We all have accents. Mal, yeah, the Paul Mal over in England. Tour 4, Rufus Sargent, our architect, the Harris Street, the Meeting House, St. Paul's. Waldo Pierce, our famous artist painter, buddies with Ernest Hemingway. The YWCA, the Washington Street, the Route 1 bypass, Quaker Cemetery, Mosley family, Joseph Wilson, our ship carver, the most well-known ship carver, and Jane Andrews, our teacher. Here's an aerial photograph. What are we looking at? It's here over on the left.
That's the Mission Oak. Mission Oak.
Yes, Mission Oak Baptist Church, yes. Yeah, so the Baptist Church was built here in 1812. Why? Because the Baptist Church, the original one, was down on Liberty Street, and what happened in 1811? The Great Fire. And everybody in the downtown area, to save their belongings and their wares and so forth, they moved everything to the Baptist Church on Liberty Street because they thought it was safe. And it wasn't. Burned down 1812. The Baptist congregation, they split in half. They were meeting up at the courthouse. Half of them built the Baptist church here, and the other half was on Congress Street. It's a small church there. And we have City Hall, 1851, the Phillips Building here, and the Unitarian. And we're standing in, what do you think? Where are we standing to get that view? The Harris Street Meeting House. Now, on the corner, where the Greek church is now? Yes, and the Greeks were worshiping in that meeting house when that church burned in, was it the 80s? 80s, 70s, 80s also.
During the parade.
I'm sorry?
During the
Yankee homecoming, yeah. Okay, Ann Withington, our wonderful resident. It was a huge movement of getting women to vote. In about 1921 was the first vote. Over 2,000 women voted here in Newburyport. Yeah, and these are the headlines. And thank you, Ann Withington. And you see where we are. Washington Street, right here is the railroad tracks. Now the crossing for the Clipper City Rail Trail. Right? And on the right here is the beautiful depot.
Where is it?
You need to go back.
Where's the depot?
The depot is now about where, between Winter Street and Summer Street, where the Route 1 bypass is now. In that area, or a little to the left, right? Okay. Now we're looking at, who's this right here? St. Paul's, right here. So we're on Washington Street and Winter Street corner. They are building the Washington, Route 1 bypass. Started it was completed in the 30s, 35 to 36. There were at least 100 homes that were torn down. A handful were moved. Talk about controversy, right? Wow. Yikes. Yeah. And then where are we here? This is High Street. Looking up along, looking west on High Street. This are the buildings that were torn down. Here is Winter Street, and out of the picture is Summer Street. These buildings were torn down. So now you see the Route 1 bypass where people will hang banners. It's right there. Okay, Professor Schofield Baptist, he was African American, and his first business was on Pleasant Street. He lived on Warren Street. That's why I was able to get him in, because he lived on Warren Street. And he had a shoe shine business on Pleasant. Then he moved down to N Street, and he was the first shoe shine business that took care of women's shoes also, because it was always the men. But he started a business also for women. You can see the city directory that shows him, boot black and hat cleaner on Inn Street. And then he lived at 29 Warren Street. He's buried up in Highland Cemetery. 205 up along Bound for 3 Roads and Beyond, Part 2. Ethel Reed, young, very bright artist. She drew posters and that were on many magazine covers. William Ashby, our well-known abolitionist, the Littles. Anna Jakes Hospital, thank you, Anna Jakes, down on Parker Street. Dr. Howe visited her on a call, and Anna's assistant walked Dr. Howe to the front door and said, Anna's very nervous, she's very anxious, she's has her 2 brothers and sister died before her. They left her a lot of money, and she's very anxious about this. And Dr. Howe said, well, we in the medical community and community members are starting to form committees to raise money for our first hospital. This was in 1880. And a couple of weeks later, Anna drove to Dr. Howe's house office, which is across the street on the corner of Carter and High, across from the Newburyport High. There's a little plaque on the house. And she brought him and gave him $20,000. And then a few weeks later, she brought him another $5,000, and they were able to open up. They renovated a mansion, a large house on the corner of Broad and Monroe. That house is gone. But that was in 1881 and 2. She lived to see that hospital. She wanted to call it the Jakes Hospital, and they insisted on calling it Anna Jakes. And then a few years later, about 1903 or 4, William C. Todd bought land up on Highland Avenue. Quite a bit of acreage, and that's where Anna Jakes Hospital is now today. Yes?
There's a paper on the road for the hospital, the old hospital, on that property.
Oh, is there? Oh, wonderful. I'll have to go and see that. Yeah, wonderful. Belleville, Atkinson Common, Maudsley, Laura Coombs Hills, another artist, and the Powder House. Okay, what are we looking at? Oh, yeah, the high school is corner of High Street and Toppins Lane. This is the Hale Estate. Great photo. Here's the hospital. Right, there's the hospital, left corner here, on the corner of Monroe and Broad. And then the first building is on Highland Avenue. This building is still here. What are we looking at? Atkinson Common. Yeah, Atkinson Common. And here you see the left buildings over here. These buildings were tenement buildings, business, carriage, making carriage, and these were built by Henry Moulton. So where is Moulton Street? And it was the old Moulton School. It was named for Henry Moulton. And where are we? 3 Roads, yes, 3 Roads. Here is to the left, Story Ave. Then you've got Ferry Road in the middle and Moseley Ave on the right. Right? Very cool. And the trolley coming from Grasshopper Plains. And there we go, Henry Moulton, Moulton's Castle. Again, you can see this. This is part of Maudsley State Park now. And Henry Moulton built this. He traveled all over the country. He was a student of architecture and history, and he built this castle. Yes?
What's the quality of Atkinson Common? There's a stone tower.
The stone tower, and what's...
Atkinson?
At Atkinson, yeah. Stone Tower was a watchtower that was built, and there's a huge movement and fundraising to get it restored. Charlie knows more about this.
The
Stone Tower, I think it was WPA project.
Yes.
There had been a wooden tower that had been vandalized and burned, and then there was the 30s stone tower, that was not as significant effort to raise money to a lot of them had
And 206, the South End, John Appleton and his wife Agnes, painters, artists. Enoch Flanders, who is Enoch? One of the last people in the United States to hold this position. The town crier, Enoch Flanders. Yes, got photos of him. There's Dr. Perkins, Hannah Flagg Gould, our poet in the mid-1800s. Selwyn Reed, another wonderful photographer, have hundreds of his photos. The Fourth Religious Society. Melnia Jones Cass. Do you recognize that name? Melnia, Boston, yes. Yes, the Cass Boulevard, yes. And she was a big community activist. Well, she spent a couple years here, and in the book I have included her name in the Kelly School records. And you can see her name. And she lived with the Smith family, another black family. And she lived here for a couple years. Captain Stephen and Elizabeth Bray, the Hale family. Booker T. Washington came to visit. Hiram P. McIntosh, another great photographer. We have hundreds of his photographs in Oak Hill Cemetery. Here's Mr. Flanders. And this is Market Square. And then, see the bell? I used to, right? Ring the bell and make his announcements. And we had Frederick Douglass. There'll be a reading of his words Sunday at Brown Square. And he came to speak here at the Temple Street, Prospect Street Church on the corner of Prospect and Fair and Temple. That's where that church was. And he stayed with another well-known abolitionist who lived on Federal Street, had a grocery store on State Street, Mr. Richard Plummer. Richard Plummer. Oh, this is a great photograph. Thank you, Jack Santos, for showing. I saw this, I don't know, I found it with you. You had that photo. I said, where did you get this photo? Okay, so where are we looking?
Spring Street?
I'm sorry?
Spring Street?
Spring? Almost, yes. Yes. So here is the corner of Spring and Fair. And what church did I say? This is Middle Street. This is the Universalist Church on Middle Street. One of the founders was Brigadier General Adolphus Greeley. His father, John Balch, was one of the founders. And right there is the weather vane, Gabriel, right there. Angel Gabriel. And what are these sticks? Mass, yes. We're looking down on Fair Street, and at the foot of Fair Street was the Cushing Riggers Wharf. And that is a vessel tied up at the wharf.
Just to point out, at the corner of Spring and Fair, to the right of that, see that wood pole? There's the tree, there's a pole, and then the tree to the left, and then a pole at the end of the fence. Yeah, right there. That's the Spring. That Spring Street was named after. There's a little spigot halfway down it, and a few years ago they were digging up the street. They actually found the well and topped it off. It's still there.
Oh, thank you. All right. Great trivia. Yes, sir.
So why was the Angel Gabriel moved?
This church eventually was torn down. I don't have it. I think it was the 1890s. So the weather vane ended up in Mr. Jackson's rope walk fame on Marble Street. It ended up in his barn. And somebody was just looking in the barn and said, hey, Mr. Jackson, there's a beautiful weather vane. And he was a member of the People's Methodists on Purchase, and this gentleman who found it, there's a whole story in the news, Daily News about it, and I said, hey, can we fix it up and put it on our church? And he agreed to do so.
Christmas card of Kennedy.
There was a stamp. I don't know about a Christmas card, but there definitely was on it, the weather vane was on it on a stamp back in the 60s. Okay, Nelson Ricks, another member of our black families. Nelson lived on Charter Street. Now, if you go up State Street and take a left at Charter, where the 5 cents, the Newburyport Bank is, and you go a little ways, and that first house on the right, and I believe the bank might own that house, that's where he lived, and he bought it in an auction, Mr. Ricks. And then on the right, he was a laborer, did odd jobs, and there is, right there's Mr. Ricks here. And he is buried, he and his family are buried in Highland Cemetery. Okay, the South End and a little bit more. The Old South. Margaret Atwood, I write about her. And what does she have named for her? Atwood Park. Yeah, and she was a wonderful woman. Her husband died young. He was the owner of a wharf. She took over, the first woman to take over, owned some ships, took over the wharf, was a merchant. She opened her house for education of girls. All around, a wonderful woman. And the French church, there's abolitionist Richard Plummer, Adolphus Greeley, Tamsin Donna. Now, I've never been affected by stories when I write about them. I read and I kind of get excited. But does anybody recognize Tamsin Donna, the name? The Donna Party. Yes, 1840s. And she grew up, if you're on Milk Street, you go past the Brown School, and that first house on the right, that's where she grew up. She was a teacher, she taught Maine, she went down to the Carolinas, married, had a child, she lost both of them, came back to Newburyport, then went out to Illinois and married George Dorner, and had 2 or 3 of her own, and then I think it was 2 stepchildren, 3 of her own, and they decided they were doing fine, just in Illinois. But Mr. Dorner, George and his brother decided that they wanted to go to California, because it was going to be a lot better out there. Well, there was a lot of bad decisions, to say the least, and so I had a zillion books and articles and tried to get the story down to this much here. And anyways, it was very sad. The 5 girls made it out of the mountains, and Tasman chose to stay with her dying husband, and she died there in the Sierra Nevadas. So that was, and I also tried to get a little bit about the pioneer life, because we New Englanders don't know anything about crossing prairies, right? So I got into and telling a little bit about that life. Yacht Club, Cruise Wharf. Candy Brown, one of my favorite people. Candy Brown, he and his wife and boys made candy. And their home down at the bottom of Bromfield Street. Bethany Groff wrote, she wrote the story, of course, Private Eben Bradbury. She wrote a wonderful book. And Oak Hill as the editing. Okay. Another one of our members, this is Mr. Edward Moses, and he was a slave in the South, and I tell the short story that he was able to escape. And he ended up living here for 50 years. He worked for the Ghlee family and the Winder families. Clarissa Greeley, the niece of Adolphus Greeley, she married John Winder, and John Winder has hundreds of photographs of Newburyport. He was a photographer, and Mr. Moses is buried up in Highland Cemetery. Beautiful photograph, probably by Selwyn Reed. Anybody recognize this? The Yacht Club, right? And the last building was designed by our famous architect who helped save the downtown, Bill Graves Perry. William Graves Perry. designer. He restored Williamsburg. Rockefeller family asked he and his firm to take care of Williamsburg. Okay, oh, another aerial photograph. What are we looking at? James Steam Mill. So where are we standing? In the Old South Steeple. Old South Steeple. That's a great photograph. Right? Here's Beck Street. This is a tough one. Any South Enders here? Old South Enders? This is Jackman School, where Atwood Park is now. It was torn down around the 80. Yeah, Jackman School. And there's Mr. Bradbury, young Mr. Bradbury. He was killed over in France. Joppa and Flatiron Point. Got the James Steam Mill, Garage, Hill Flag Yards, Methodist Church, Emma Andrews, Rope Walks, the Comb Factory, Woodwell Shipyard, Goodwin's Landing and Clam Shacks, and Flatiron Point. I've made it a point since I got involved, since 2006 or 7, is to try and highlight Joppa, our little jockey neighborhood. And I worked on the interpretive panels down at Joppa Park. I talked to the director, Lisa Reed of Parks. I said, okay, you gotta redo this. Okay, let's have some panels about Jockey. So I had Scott Nason, Duncan McBurney, take a look at everything. And so I'm very, very pleased with that. Okay, this is a wonderful photograph. You recognize it right off. Railroad tracks on Water Street, now the Clipper City Rail Trail. And here's Joppa Park. It's the slip. I grew up calling it the slip. I don't know what it's known for, what it's known as now, but that's the slip. Right there at the end of the seawall here. You can see large fishing nets here. And Tibbetts Bakery on the corner of Purchase and Harrison. And here's the sign. See the railroad? The city railroad cut through. So remember, when you're walking on the city rail trail, if you haven't done it, folks, get out there. It's the most beautiful part, right? You're walking along, you forget. You're walking basically on where the city railroad tracks were. And they're coming and they're curving or crossing Water Street, and they're cutting right up through here, cutting through Hancock and Chestnut and along Marches Hill. And this was Hicks or Tibbetts Bakery. And this building, anybody remembers this building? Long time Newburyporters. This is on Chestnut Street. This is the old comb factory, the Noise Comb Factory. And now there's 2 or 3 houses there. And over here is where the rail trail crosses Chestnut Street, right here. Okay? So there's a couple, 2 or 3 houses here now. And they make decorative combs, for the barber shops, so forth. This was headquarters. This is unbelievable. We were the place. I mean, in the 1800s, you had the shipping, the shoes, the combs, and so forth. And the Noyes family created, designed the machinery, because it was all done by hand, that they were making these combs out of the cattle horns and the tortoise shells and so forth. They developed machinery. So anybody in the United States, if they were starting up their business and if they had any questions, they would contact the Noyes family as a consultant and say, okay, we need some help. And where are we? Flatiron Point. There you go. And to the sea is John Winder in Bummers Rock. Everybody know Bummers Rock? Right at the corner of Ocean Boulevard and Water and Plum Island Turnpike. The Winder house is still there, and there's this big boulder. Okay, Ocean Boulevard is Rolf's Lane. Okay, Rolf's Lane is technically the Newbury side, and then our Newburyport side is Ocean Boulevard. You'll see a boulder there. And people used to stand out, and they would stick their thumb out and bum a ride to Plum Island. Now, the lady, Betty Little, she was up at Avita, and she was on a van ride, and I was given a little history tour. And we got to this place here, and she starts telling stories, and she says, wow, when we were a little girl, when we were young girls, we weren't supposed to because we were girls, but me and my friends, we would stand out there at Bummers Rock, and we would hitch rides, and we tried, and we'd see how many times we could go back and forth without somebody telling and saying, I'm going to tell your mother and father you're out bumming rides. Spencer Pierce Little Farm. You can see that from Plum Island Turnpike, so that's why I included. The airport, the hotel, the lighthouse, the life-saving service, Coast Guard, the Knobs, and our late wonderful author, Nancy Rodgrass Ware. Her family had a place down at the Knobs in the Wildlife Refuge. Okay, there used to be communities down there. The Knobs, Camp Sea Haven, probably the first polio camp for children down in that same area. Ann Lagasse, her grandparents started the camp, and eventually her parents took over, and she spent summers down there. And then Grape Island was also my classmate Stephanie Carr. Her parents spent a lot of time in Grape Island. That's now covered with water. Okay, there's the old airport. We had some of the first flights in the country here on the salt marshes. That's where they would experiment. This is a great view. Figure out where you are on Plum Island. This is the center. Right? So this is Northern Boulevard. The photo was taken from the old beach company business house and looking north. There's a great aerial photograph. Got your lighthouse here. Life-saving buildings. This now is Reservation Terrace that is almost underwater. And the basin here.
What year some of that?
I don't know. Early 1930s, 40s. Can we see any cars? I can't see any cars. There's the Knobs. Now the Knobs started out as a little community for the hunters, for the men, for fishing and hunting, duck hunting, geese, and so forth. Then the women, the wives and the children eventually said, no, wait a minute, we want to go down there too. So then it eventually became a place to go for the summertime. And this is a great photo, isn't it? One of Nancy Ware's photos. It's great. Here we are, Camp Sea Haven. I write a lot about it, a lot of photos of it. And we had a reunion. The late Mike Balger and Ann Lagasse and I planned this reunion for Ann's family and all the campers. And geez, I think there had to be at least 80 or 90 people who showed up for this reunion down at the old Newbury Fire Hall. And it was wonderful. They could go out on the beach. And this was the only place that they were kind of accepted because a lot of them, they couldn't walk, they were in wheelchairs, they had braces. Originally it was for kids with polio. They had a saltwater pool. Here are all the buildings. And one of the great organizations in Newburyport that helped Camp Sea Haven was the Neptunes.
No.
Yes. They did a lot of behind the scenes, but it's the Neptunes who helped Camp Sea Haven. This is the old Knobs life-saving station. The Knobs life-saving station here. And that's it. So there's some of the highlights of Volume 2.